In this book talk, I'm going to be analyzing pages 163 to 165 from Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. Now, in this section, he explains the moment when Alvin Dewey gets the profiles of suspects Dick Hickok and Perry Smith for the first time, and it also gives the perspective of Marie Dewey, who was sort of frantic in the beginning of this section because of all the commotion going on in the neighborhood, and she gets intrigued by the pictures of the murderers. And what is interesting here is Marie is actually the daughter of an FBI agent, so we get this perspective of someone who knows what her husband is going through in a sense, which is something that's not really talked about too much in the text, but I do think that it is an interesting point to bring up, especially because it plays a big part in her examination of the profiles of the murderers. Now, in the beginning of this segment, we don't really know what is going on at first because the text states that Dewey is given a manila envelope and we don't quite know what is in the envelope, but it seems that Capote writes in this way to create an ominous mood for the readers. And in the next part, it's unclear what's going on at first when Marie is describing all the bad things going on in the neighborhood. And once again, this is done in a frantic, almost foreboding manner that's parallel to the bad things surrounding the murder. For example, when she says that the 12-year-old namesake of Dewey started a blaze, it's also parallel to how Dewey is feeling with all the craziness surrounding the case. And this section is very descriptive and creates this imagery of pure chaos in the town. And I also think the family cat is a symbol for the murders, and the Cocker Spaniel is a symbol for the clutters, because the text talks about the family cat attacking the Cocker Spaniel that lived across the street, and it almost seems too similar to the clutter murder for it not to be a symbol. So this could also be some bias of exaggeration that Capote puts in here, but regardless, it does add a lot to this section. So then, without saying anything, he gives Marie the envelope and she asks if it's good news. But the way that he writes this lets the readers know that it's not going to be good news, which all goes back to Capote's way of creating that ominous mood in the readers. Marie looks at the pictures and descriptions of the murderers, and the sentence structure Capote uses here mimics that of true case files because he didn't just write it like normal sentences, and this adds to the experience overall, almost as if readers were Marie reading it for the first time, being just as confused as she is, especially since it uses a lot of technical terms that most people who aren't involved in the criminal justice system, they wouldn't know otherwise. And then she goes on to comment on the picture of Perry, saying his eyes have a dreamy expression and says that they're pretty in an actorish way. And it seems for Perry, she has a lot of positive connotations, versus for Dick, where she says he has forbiddingly criminal eyes, which is very negative connotation. So this also gives some juxtaposition between the two murderers as well. Dewey then talks about how Floyd Wells gave information to the authorities about how Dick had planned the murder, and then explains how now everyone who had worked for Mr. Clutter is being tracked down, and he even says that they would have found Wells on their own, which is kind of a little bit of a bragging undertone, like, oh, we're so good at our jobs that we would have been able to find him without help. And the tone that Capote takes against Dewey here makes it seem like he is full of himself and so wrapped up in this case. And that leads into the next part where Marie is worried about his health because Dewey was smoking too much, possibly because of the stress of the case. And I think that Capote did a good job making us question whether Dewey was okay without being too obvious at first. Now, the last sentence of the text, in my opinion, is one of the most influential in the book because the way Dewey villainizes Dick and Perry, like in a way that makes Marie fearful, is so interesting. Because Marie was so captivated by the murderers at first when she looked at their photos, and then after he says, "Think of those eyes coming towards you," everything changed for her. Her entire perspective on the murderers changed once she realized, oh wait, what if that was me? What if that was my family? And Capote includes this section in his text because it just shows how the murderers were suave and charming through looks, but the second Dewey reminded his wife of the thought that they murdered, she changed her perspective. I think it's also good to note that in the beginning of Capote's research, Dewey disregarded him in a lot of ways and didn't really take him seriously, and that bias that Capote had toward Dewey shows a lot in this segment, and it also shows a lot about Marie's character being the wife of someone in the law enforcement system who has to deal with all this, and even though she grew up with a family member in the FBI, it's still a lot for someone to take in, and her husband's extreme involvement in this case has had a huge toll on her life as well.